Hi, my name's Luke Oliver. I'm the director, producer, writer, and main dog's body on this movie, Elindil's Secret. Due to the complexity of the story, I've decided to do two different commentaries, one based just on the story, the other on effects, music, whatever tickles my fancy to talk about. So this will be the one dedicated to story and plot. Starting straight off, we've obviously starting with a crescent moon, and it is kind of a figure within the movie that reoccurs in many times. So I thought it was a nice place to start the story and to also give the story a sense of realism by starting in the past and saying, okay, this is something that has happened in the past. We're not dealing with something that is fiction or something that has been generated over time. This is actually something that began 400 BC and is real. And so instantly we're thrust into understanding that the story happened a long time ago and that there are these ancient artifacts that were created and distributed and made available to the clan of Elindil at least, but certainly out there for people to find. The original idea for this movie came from my brother-in-law at the time, John Peel, who also did the lighting for the movie and plays a number of minor characters. And he sparked an idea which I then took and essentially made it into what would be a much larger movie than what this is. And almost like George Lucas with Star Wars, kind of realising that the story actually had multiple containers or multiple stories, and that this would be the first part of that. And if you think about where the story ends, really it's a setup for the next movie, and this whole movie could almost be seen as a first act of a much broader and larger story. And that's probably why in some ways at times this feels a little disjointed, because it's setting up a lot of ideas which would then come to fruition in a later part of the story. And it's also why a scene like this needs to exist, because you've got to set up a number of items, you've got to set up the history, you've got to set up what Elindil's interest is, what he's looking at, what he's writing on, the little stones, all the little keys and integral parts that will eventually be used as clues and used as apparatus to find essentially this place again at the end of the movie. This scene probably is a little laboured, but I wanted to set up the fact that there are lots of different people that would come and were part of the clan, and that they would each, take something and guard it, and that there was kind of this larger group of people that were involved in maintaining Elindil's secret, even though at this stage we don't know anything about what it is. We just, see little stones, we see jars, we see scrolls, and we see basically hooded characters walking in and out. These are the people dedicated to protecting Elindil's secret and almost making sure that his plan in the long run comes to fruition. None of which we know at this stage, of course. And I love this opening title simply because it's the moon that illuminates the secret, and that again is another theme that runs throughout this story. It's just little subtle things which you put into a movie and hope that people might understand, but ultimately if they don't, it's not the end of the world. This scene, although from a narrative point of view it doesn't have a lot of strength, it's really, the main point is to set up the fact that other people have found these writings that Elindil's laid out, and that they would go and search for them, and that the clan would be aware of it, that they would be protecting the secret, and that in some way they were almost seen as a sacrifice. So they're almost lured into these places to be a sacrifice. Now this scene actually got cut down quite a bit towards the end. This character obviously goes in, and part of this character, which was called the Searching Man, part of his reason for doing this, and part of us seeing him enter the cave and see the stones and see where to place them, is that we're setting the audience up for the next time when our main characters come to this same place, so that they have an expectation already of what is going to happen. So we're telling the audience, okay, this is what's going to happen, so that the next time that we arrive, they already have a sense of what's supposed to happen. And then we see if our heroes have a different fate to our searching man here. There's lots of Hebrew through this story, because it essentially derives from a Hebrew origin, and basically comes out of the Babylonian exile, where this is point in time where the Hebrews lost their law, they lost their Torah, they lost their scriptures. And I saw that was an opportunity to kind of grasp that moment and say, well, what if someone changed that point in time? What if someone actually made their own scriptures and replaced them and said that, oh, these are actually our old writings that we used to have. This is our old scriptures. They've been found, except they've actually been replaced by someone else. And that was kind of the premise for Elindil getting his place in history and his secret, even though he's wanted to protect it and keep it a secret. He kind of has this little moment in time as a foundation to be able to both lure people, and that's why this searching man says they're lies, because he doesn't want to believe what's being read, because it contradicts what he's been reading, and ultimately he becomes a sacrifice. And this scene was then extended to show that these two characters were talking, that one of them would be the chosen now. One of them would go down and read the next inscription. They would then, after they'd read it, close the whole apparatus back up again, and then they would go and protect the secret for their lifetime. I didn't include that in the movie because I felt it was a little laboured. It was a little bit long. We didn't shoot it particularly well, and I ultimately didn't think it needed to be in there. Then we jump to what I've called 3 months earlier, because I want to kind of get the sense that we're in the present now, but this still happened earlier. And basically this is the clan turning on themselves. You've got the hooded people now killing each other and chasing each other, and again, we don't know why. We don't know why this is happening. We just know that now we've got obviously a very ugly looking knife, and someone who seems quite powerful, and we've got two other characters who are chasing after each other. That's the character I play, and I've been told I was quite scary, although I don't think that I'm that scary.
I know you have it.
This is a nice little moment on the edge of the cliff, and really here wanting to set up the fact that there was a chosen one, which we would have learnt about in the previous scene as well. And the idea that the chosen one's actually returned and has been betrayed by the clan, or by this particular person, and that's why they're wanting to kill him, because he's betrayed the chosen one, and obviously that's a bad thing. And now we're in the present day. We meet one of our leads. I was always unsure of who the actual lead character was. Was it Abigail? Was it Jack? And never really settled that in my mind, and I think that's probably why they both kind of play a lead. I think ultimately Abigail is the lead character, and really here we're setting up the fact that she's been up late. We hopefully realise that it's because she's been studying. Max is obviously a bit of an old... he's very interested in Abigail, which doesn't impress her at all. There's all her books on the table that she's been studying. And we find out that she's basically been... she's come from overseas, from London is where she lives, and she's come to study close to where this jar is. And her brother's has sent Max with the paper to show her.
What is it?
You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
This scene was really difficult. We shot it about...
Well, they were found in
we shot it about 3 or 4 different times. And I never really got particularly settled with it. We actually have jumped between a couple of different times that we shot it. So the first part is the initial... one of the initial shoots, and then this later section is what we shot later. We actually shot a whole new scene in a different location where Abigail visits Marcus late at night, and tried to use that to convey this same information. It's a very... there's a lot of exposition going on in this scene, and it's hard to get all that information across in a nice succinct way, so that we set up very quickly that these people are searching for this jar. It got sent to them by a guy called Jack, that there are other people looking for it, and what its importance is. It's quite a difficult scene. Look, I'm kind of happy with where we ended up. It's not perfect. It has a few little issues. We struggled with the shooting of it. We shot it very quickly, unfortunately, and didn't have a lot of time, particularly at the end here. You know, we just didn't have time to move the camera a lot, so we just had to put up with a few different reframes. And then we just established a bit more of this love interest of him kind of wanting to be with her, and yet it's not appropriate, obviously, and a bit of humour to help. At this point in time, we introduce a new character. Again, we just wanted to reinforce where she's staying, that bit of paper, which is going to travel around a little bit. Blake here is essentially comic relief. The idea is that, he's tried to call a cab and they're all busy, so he's gone for some four-wheel drive guy who will be able to take them to town. And he ends up being an Aussie, and a guy who's a bit weird and awkward, and has a lot of trouble trying to light his cigarette, which became quite an interesting gag as we went through. This scene was actually it was a pickup that we shot well after our original block of shooting, and it was a scene to set up that this guy in white, who ends up being Jack, is a bit of an ominous, scary figure. The other thing I wanted to set up is that he can't read Hebrew, which is ultimately why he needs to turn to Abigail, because she can. So she's the scholar, and he is the person wanting to get at these hoods and to find what is behind the scroll that he's got. But he can't read it, so that's why he has to turn to her. And what he has done is he's also managed to find 2 of these scrolls ultimately. So he's been able to send one to Abigail, and he's also been able to keep one for himself. That's why he's able to basically look and try and find it on his own before even seeking Abigail out. I mean, to him, Abigail is a long shot. If she can help out, great, but he's going to try and do it on his own. Now, this scene here with the 2 guys talking, it was always a little bit awkward. It was relatively early on in the shoot, and these guys were still getting to know each other, so I think that's some of the reason why it comes across as a little bit awkward. But it was just meant to be a bit of fun set up, really, that why Blake would then want to hang around of his own accord, because up until that point he's pretty skeptical about what's going on, whereas suddenly he's now interested because he thinks maybe there's some money in it for him, so he's suddenly interested in helping out. these are all, I mean, they're all clues and hints that you hope the audience picks up on quite quickly, but you're never quite sure how well it's coming across. Then we've got this scene where we finally meet her brother.
So they're close.
And yeah, he's basically found,
Thank you.
but he's found the Milan Falls, which is what she was looking at earlier. So he's found out where they are, and he's also found a guide that's going to help them to get there. And then there's this other character who's now chasing them, been sent by, well, we don't know who, but it's actually been sent from people inside the house that she was talking to. Then we get our white character here again, Jack. He's finding another jar, so obviously the information he got from the hood has led him to find this jar, which is good. It means that at least now he'll have whatever is inside it. And then we see Marcus coming out of the museum, so we get a sense of where he works. He works in a museum. And our dark me character, who is obviously hunting Marcus down, and he's trying to identify him by calling him. He's obviously called him earlier. And then this kind of stranger comes to help and cops it, which I really is just to highlight how bad Handress is. He will kill anyone, he will take anyone down, and don't get in his way. He's a mean dude. Always thought that was a nice little moment, the van driving past and kind of catching them up. This little moment here is actually a pickup, just seeing Jack leading the way before Abigail arrives, and then the guide kind of talking about this other person that was asking about Milan Falls. So obviously Jack has already been
What was his name?
kind of leading the way and preparing the way for Abigail, and to also for himself to find the next step and the next steps of Elindil's secret. Guide's obviously scared. He's had a dream that he dies at a waterfall, and so the thought of going to the falls he doesn't want to participate in, but he's happy to take them close and close enough for them to find their own way. Yeah, it also gives us a chance to have a bit of fun. Obviously, Max is not dressed to be in this environment, and and he's still interested in finding gold, which Blake's character, I had a lot of fun with that. I really enjoyed just, him being a bit of a simple Aussie bloke. And now we've got our guide, who's obviously, even though he's not at the falls, is still quite nervous and a bit shaken up by even being as close as he is. And, well, he should be, because where there's a scroll and where there's a cloth, where there's people searching for Elindil's secret, there the hoods are. And this scene was, in terms of the writing, it wasn't that complicated. It was much more complicated to shoot, which I'll talk about in the other commentary stream. Really, the key to these moments from a story point of view was about creating an authenticity and creating amazing places, so that a big waterfall like that feels like it would have something special near it, and that would be a place of interest. And therefore, why wouldn't there be one of the jars hidden there? We always wondered, because this one's underwater, whether that would cause an issue, and I don't think we actually researched whether there would be a problem with sealing up the jar in such a way that it would leak, because originally the idea was that there were scrolls inside, but then I realised that it was just going to get far too convoluted back and forwards, and it was easier just to have a stone in there, which is one of the reasons why the jars are actually quite large and the stones are quite small. But it was actually easier to just deal with a stone rather than scrolls that then led to stones, which then led to opening things up. It just became a bit convoluted, a process in order to get to the next step. And I just realised, and it was only within the last couple of months before shooting, and so the jars had already been made. But that whole process needed to be simplified. Otherwise, the audience would just never. The story's complicated enough without having to add something like that into it. And the story is made complicated so that people would have to watch it a couple of times. A first viewing, you'll understand it. A first viewing, you'll get it. But you won't understand necessarily all of the nitty-gritty details. And, even little things like what Abigail just said then, they're little details which are actually very thought out. They're very intentional. And but for an audience in the first viewing, you're not necessarily going to capture all that information, but you are going to get that she's found what she wants and it's important to her. And and that Blake's not a big believer. I love that little line. I don't think you should rub it. He thinks a genie will pop out of it. And now we're into our kind of first really big chase. Look, chases are fun. They add excitement. They leave room for music, and I like it. And very quickly we're into story anyway, because obviously I always thought this would be a surprise where Max dropped the jar. Just one of those moments that I just always thought the audience would go, no, that's not going to happen, And obviously Abigail goes to look, and what she thinks is supposed to be there isn't there. And there was kind of this toing and froing between the good guys and bad guys, where one person's got it, then the next person's got it. So Abigail had the jar now. Well, she doesn't have the jar, she doesn't have the contents of it, she didn't even know what she was looking for. But our mysterious character Marone does know. And every good story should have a nice big jump in it. This has got quite a few jumps. Cassie, who plays the character of Abigail, was not keen on doing this. She actually did it herself and did not like having to do that jump, and we had to get it first take. We didn't have time to hang around at the location, and we didn't have another costume for her, and we couldn't dry that one in time, so it really was a case of you've just got to... I said to her once you're up the top, if you're not going to jump, let us know well beforehand, because we'll need to stop recording. But once we get going and once Daniel is running at you, you have got to jump. And she held true to form, did a great performance in the process, and jumped and was a trooper, even though it was freezing cold. The water was absolutely freezing. Again, we got a bit more comedy there with Blake, and also we're just finding out whether the Hoods actually think they need those three characters, and the Hoods don't feel like they do, but to Jack, Abigail is obviously quite important, as is her brother, who's now been captured by our head villain Alan, who's obviously quite wealthy. He's got a butler whose voice is actually mine. You run out of people that can do all the voices and things after a while, so you just got to kind of fill in and do it yourself half the time.
Come back here.
We're finding out here that Marcus is very unaware of
Your premonition was correct.
what's going on,
It was a good idea.
and setting up that there's a bit more than meets the eye with these characters. We haven't seen anything yet that is mystical, and this is kind of our first look at that Handress can kind of have these premonitions, sees things, and is obviously instrumental in helping Alan and the clan protect Elindil's secret. And there's this bit of paper, we saw her writing on a bit of paper the Marcus's phone number. That's how they found him. And now they've found out that bit of paper also has her house. So they figure they might be able to find out some information or find out more about her by getting to her house. And I always thought the name Taska was an interesting one, particularly because it's Russian. It's kind of the feminine version of task. And she's someone that gets things done, as we see there, her assassinating someone. Obviously, the job she was on when she took the phone call, which I always thought was kind of funny. You're on one job and you take the call for another one. Obviously, these guys are still feeling like they need to run. The even though the hoods aren't chasing them anymore, they don't know that, and they feel like they are still being chased, and they want to get out of there. And of course, Jack is wanting to get their attention. Blake's quest to light a cigarette continues. I just thought that was a funny little moment. There's lots of stories behind even just the cars here. They're just people in the crew that we borrowed them. Always wanted, him to have a bit of a sports car, that he had this upper hand of being able to go quicker than them. But of course, they're not really in the terrain for fast. They're in terrain for a four-wheel drive. So, even what is not necessarily the world's largest puzzle, a car like that is just not going to go through its speed. It'll clog up the engine and do bad things to it. So, obviously he does make his way through there, but he can't do it at speed, and ultimately they feel like they're getting away. And now we have Tasker arriving at Abigail's rented house, or her place that she's renting, while she's in this country, which is never really defined. We're always kind of near Syria, near Turkey. We're in that area. And obviously she doesn't get any time to actually look around, but she's there to hear this next conversation which is about to happen. And these guys are all rushing around trying to leave, and finally Blake has got a cigarette lit. Which, I never really wanted a character that smoked, but I kind of put up with it because he kind of fails every time, and this time he fails because he uses a vase as a weapon, and obviously douses his cigarette at the same time. I always thought the little interplay between the flowers and the vase, something that's not lethal and something that could kind of hurt someone, was funny. This is one of those scenes that has a lot of dialogue, and a lot happens very quickly, and there's a lot of energy in the room. There's a lot of characters, there's a lot of close-ups, and
So what do you want?
trying to keep it interesting and keep the audience engaged is very difficult in these kind of scenes where you've got to get a lot of information across, but you don't want the audience to get bored, and you don't want them to get lost. So it's very difficult.
The jar was empty.
This scene, the earlier scene with Abigail and Max, where they look at the paper, and a scene later on with the character that's called Ray. The three scenes that were just very difficult to get right, to get the information in the right order. And even though we obviously shot a script, the editing process was really difficult to kind of move things around, get the timing right. This scene particularly, I probably edited it originally a bit too tight, and it all happened a bit fast. And I came back and I just gave it a few little pauses and a few little moments just to help it sit, just a few little looks, so that it didn't move too quickly. And then I probably pulled some bits of information out so that it wasn't too convoluted. Again, just give the audience what they need. They need to know that at the end of the day, the clan are close by, which we see. That the assassin Tasker is there. We know they're coming, and they have to keep moving. And now they've got to work out, do they trust this character who's just walked in? He's the one that has sent them the cloth. But can they trust him? And at this stage, Abigail feels safe enough to go forward, and so decides to do so. But obviously Max is very hesitant and doesn't really want to be out of her sight. He loves her and doesn't want her going off with a strange guy. And again, just another opportunity for Blake to get in the mix. And Tasker, we haven't seen much of her yet, other than we know where she keeps her phone. Really, she is able to be here and look after these two that have stayed at the house, so that our other evil characters can focus on what's happening with Abigail and Jack. Always wanted the story to have a lightness to it. It's one of the reasons why Blake is in the story. But little lines like this, where he says,
He has a simple life.
I'm not blind.
she says, I'm not blind. Of course, they're about to find out that the person they're going to see is. So, again, it's one of those lines that's for someone that watches it second, third time and goes and kind of picks that up. You would never find that funny the first time because you've got no reference to know that it's funny. So there's lots of little tidbits for second, third viewers that hopefully they'll pick up on and go, oh, okay, that's why that's there, and oh, okay, that's that information. And that line's almost just for the trailer. You put a line like that in, but it's a nice little moment to lead back to these characters trying to get Abigail's stuff together, get ready to leave, meet the airport, and obviously the risk that Tasker will get this, but no, she didn't.
Yeah, that'd be terrible. Especially now that she's just starting to get to like you.
And I like that these guys were playful, even though they're, playing with the fact that Max doesn't have a hope with Abigail, which will ultimately pay off later on the mountain. And then we've got this moment where they smell jasmine, and she's obviously either her skin smells like jasmine or she's wearing perfume, and that pays off later as well, apart from Blake just being a funny, quirky character. And so we end up in this scene where a lot is explained in a very short amount of time. It was a very difficult scene to both write, shoot and edit. The shooting of it was a very long day, a full day of shooting to get this scene. And ultimately, when you write a scene like this, you end up writing far more than you actually need. And you don't do that on purpose. The issue with when you write something on paper is you always feel like you have to explain everything. And when you put it up on screen, you get the information across much quicker, and the audience, you realise as you're editing it that the audience is going to get this with less words than what you've put in there. And sometimes it is that case of less is more. And as long as you've got enough angles to cut to, you can always chop it down. And in the case of this scene, I actually moved a lot of the information around a lot and ended up kind of segmenting it into how can I make this the most logical way forward. How can I tell this in the most logical order? Because I think if you make something logical, ultimately your audience will almost instinctively just follow from point to point to point without even having to think about it too much. And basically what he's explaining is that Elindil has these extra scrolls hidden away based on this point in time in Babylon where the Hebrews lost their scriptures. And basically he has created this scenario where he can say that the people, the elders and the rabbis of the time actually wrote their own scripture to replace what the people knew was originally there, and that he found what was the actual original scriptures and he's hidden them away. Now, of course, if that was true, that in our life, in the world that we know, that would cause massive problems. That would cause political tensions, it would cause religious tensions, it would most likely cause a world war. If that kind of information was seen to be real, it would cause such problems. And that's kind of what I was playing on. And of course, as the story unfolds, we realise that Elindil really has played on this moment. He in fact has fabricated what he has written to make the scriptures about him being a leader, and so probably they wouldn't have been as readily accepted. But what it has allowed him to do is kind of protect his ultimate dream, which is to destroy the Ark, which is the artifact they find at the end, and for him to be able to find the Tree of Life in time and reform it. Now, a lot of that information we find out towards the end about what Elindil's
So tell me about this person that can't be killed.
intentions are. Now, this scene is really where we set up the MacGuffin of the story.
So what do we do if he's there?
And basically, we set up Handress as being the character that can't be killed. And it's linked to him because of the name of the knife, called the Knife of Handress. And obviously Alan has named the character Handress in order to protect himself and to be the holder of the knife that can actually kill him. And he figures if I've got this person as my protector who's got this thing, well then I'll always be safe. And then also I'll always be ready if Ray or Jack, who are the only other two people that can't be killed except by the Knife of Handress, come to get him.
Come here first.
So again, we've got one of these little moments where we're happy and sad all at the same time. We've got the goodies coming in, everyone's happy, all going well. Then they realise that Jacob hasn't checked in. He's been protecting the cave, and then they suddenly think, hang on, what's going on? And he's the character that was obviously tortured a bit earlier in the story and eventually killed. And so now Marone is off to find out what's going on at the cave. Of course, that's at the same time that these two are heading to the cave. And they're aware that really they don't have a lot of time. They've got to keep moving.
Follow me.
Again, opportunities for more chases, more running, people chasing after each other, which is, always good opportunity for big music and gets people excited, and also builds up to the fact that we know where they're heading. They're heading to the cave. They've got a cloth, they've got a stone, and now they're about to experience what our person in the 1200s experienced, which is a hood tailing them, in fact very closely, almost and almost identically, and shot very much on purpose in the same style, so that we get that sense that this is happening all over again. So you'll find almost identical shots are used, one after the other, in order to set up the fact that they're seeing the same things, they're experiencing the same things. That's all done very intentionally, in order to set the audience up to go, okay, we know what's going to happen here. The baddie's going to come in, he's going to chant a bit, and they're going to fall down in the hole. And of course, there's two of them this time, so that already makes a point of difference. The other point of difference is that Jack has some experience of the clan, even though the audience doesn't necessarily know this. And so he's come prepared. He's brought harnesses, he's got rope, and even though he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, he is prepared, or more prepared than anyone else could be for this circumstance. Again, not being able to read Hebrew, and Ray being blind, he doesn't know what this says.
Hold to the one that gives life.
But thankfully he's got Abigail there to read it for him. He still can't make sense of it. And ultimately, again, that phrasing there is a play on words. Hold to the one that gives life means there's two poles that stick out and you want to hold to the one that gives life. One of them will shut the thing down, the other one will stay open, and you can grab onto it. Now ultimately he fligs onto the one that will shut it back down again. But it doesn't matter, because Marone's turning up with another stone that will be able to open it up again and get him free. So, he hold to the one that gives life, well, we actually end up holding onto the wrong one. And that closes the apparatus up again, which traps him beneath, which we're about to see.
Abigail, behind you!
Sooner.
Jack!
Onto the one that gives life. Great. More Hebrew.
A bit of a play with the fact that he can't read it, and he's the one that's down there with the clue. And now, of course, the actual floor is holding the rope tense for Jack, who's below. So it kind of allows her to come free.
Him?
And of course be attacked by Marone. And it was a difficult. This is a difficult part of the story because you kind of, how do you make it believable that she could ever fight someone like this? And you almost needed to make it him making a stupid mistake, being distracted and kind of just going straight for her and getting caught up in the rigging rather than anything else, and then her just reacting and managing to kind of hit the sweet spot. So there's a bit of luck involved there, and a bit of, or a lack of luck on his behalf, getting caught up in her carabiner. Always, I never thought that was funny, the moment with the phone, but it tends to get a laugh. And I guess, he's in the middle of a dark cave, but I kind of always figured Alan's so well financed, and that cave is a part of where they are actually protecting, so they would have set up the ability to ring there, and I didn't think it was so far-fetched that he would be able to call in the cave, because they would have made that in the current place, in the current time, they would have made that possible for their own purposes in order to be able to communicate. But ultimately, obviously, it is a little bit funny, I guess, that he's dying and he goes for the phone. So maybe that's
female
it.
sacrifice.
Kind of set up here that,
But let's not get ahead of
Abigail is actually becoming necessary for the baddies as well, and rather than getting rid of her,
I need you to go to the cave.
that Elindil has written in his things that when they bring him back to life, they want a female sacrifice, and so now she's actually becoming perhaps something that the Hoods would want to be there at the end.
Quickly!
And yeah, so her importance in the story is growing. She is one of these characters that kind of just fumbles along. She doesn't make a lot of decisions other than to continue moving forward. She doesn't have the opportunity to make a lot of decisions, and so it's hard to want to root for her.
No thanks to you! Things flying everywhere, some freaks trying to come in! What have you been doing?
The freaks it's always a funny line.
Found the next clue.
Down there.
Yes.
How far?
Just over the edge.
Alright. Now we'll see how strong you are.
And how heavy you... Never mind.
Never call a woman fat. Never. Don't do it. And he almost, it was part of what we set up, but he almost looks at camera there. He kind of, he plays with that moment. It's quite nice.
The light of Arcanand reveals the way in the message. Find life and destroy the curse.
Is that it?
Yes.
Did notice also as she was going down, she has a little look at his arm and looks and sees how big his watch band
I've
is.
never heard of it.
And I'm not sure in that moment whether she wonders,
It's way in the message.
is he part of the clan?
The cloth is referred to as the message.
But obviously we find out later. It is, but again, that's just a little shot to pay off the fact that she
It's a
has
house.
questioned that.
Your friends would have picked it up.
I hope they've taken care of it.
Again, this is a playful little moment. This originally, when I originally wrote this scene was meant to have a lot more suspense and was meant to be quite a bit longer. They were going to go into the building and sit and wait, and then realise that it had been stolen, and then chase after. But as different versions went along, I just kind of realised it would work. And ended up being a nice little gag with the Jasmine, and the fact that she, with one hit knocks them both out. And again, he's put a cigarette in his mouth and gets knocked out. There's a lot happening there in a small little moment. And you get to do that as you build a story and you build complex layers of things happening. You get to put more and more into little moments and make it more fun. And just like here, you don't have to set up much to say, he's blocked. They're going to have to jump in a different car, which means they're not in a familiar car, but at least this one's going to deal with, the area a bit better than a sports car. So maybe they've got the advantage now because the other two cars are just sedans.
You need to come with me. We need to go to
And then you've got enough hoods also to both chase them and to also go to the cave and check out what could be written there.
What?
Or where Marone might be. The next kind of 10 minutes of the movie are actually quite difficult to write. You've got to keep the story moving, but at the same time you don't want to be so much jumping backwards and forwards that it just feels like you're not actually doing anything. You don't want to just spoon feed the audience, simple little information like, they could land a plane wherever we want because it's only going to be a small plane. So you got to kind of treat these moments quite delicately, and give them purpose, give them reason, but not linger too long.
We'll need it all.
Yeah, and then bounce back and forwards. You don't want to bounce back and forwards too much either. It doesn't feel real. Feels like you're really just giving fragments of information.
It's not too far away.
Great. Let them know where it is.
So it's it's hard.
Something about the message. The light of Arcanan.
And is Marone there?
No, there is no sign of him.
All right. Come back.
And again, this to and froing. Now the goodies are kind of feel like they're winning, whereas a moment ago the baddies thought they were. Same with these two. They had the cloth and now they don't. And so it's constant. Everything that comes out of Dave Seraphin's mouth, who's the actor that plays Blake, is just so funny. He's such a great actor.
It's Abby. Hello? Someone's taken it. We'll try and follow her. Damn. Now I'm really in her bad books.
We're not having much luck with the ladies today.
It's been taken.
Now we get this is probably one of my favourite scenes. I enjoyed writing it. Thoroughly enjoyed shooting it. We basically, for every shot, I think we did one take for each shot. So I think we did kind of a close up on each of them and a slightly looser shot on each of them. And so we shot the scene 4 times. And we didn't even, from memory, I don't think we even necessarily did them in order, because I think basically we put the camera in position for one shot and then did about 4 different scenes. So they would go one scene and that shot, then they'd go the next scene, next scene, next scene. Then we'd change the shot and then we'd go scene, 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 and then we'd move around the other side of the car, shoot in the other window and do all those 4 scenes again. So the actors did a really good job of remembering lines, keeping within the scenes, and did just an extraordinary job on these, particularly this scene being quite long and very tough, but I think it cuts together quite nicely with the extra footage we shot.
So, this is revenge.
And then we get to find out really what's going on. These guys are trying to get revenge on the hoods, and they've brought her along.
Brought me along on a personal vendetta.
This isn't just about me.
and they haven't necessarily been completely honest with her. And even within this own story, within this little story, he hasn't been completely honest, because he said to her, you know, that they killed his father, but Ray's his father. So yes, they tried to kill Ray, but he's kind of told a different story to, again, get her sympathy and get her to still go along. He's really trying to appeal to her, but tell her the truth, but, well, tell her enough of the truth to get her to come along, but not so much that she'll think that he's involved with the clan. He's not willing to give that information up yet. And we don't want to give that information up yet anyway, because it's kind of the end of the story, that little nice moment of discovery there. But Dave Donchi did an amazing job in that scene. That's certainly my favourite scene with him in it. And now we get a little bit of time with Taska, her gloating in victory and checking in, and also just setting up, you know, where we're travelling to next. Again, the story's complex, so sometimes you have to just give, you kind of spoon feed little bits of information to say, okay, you might not get everything that's going on, but what you do know is we're going to this place, it's called the Light of Arcanant, and that's the next step. You don't want to treat the audience like idiots, but you also need to realise that when things are moving so quick that you don't necessarily pick up on everything, and you know, a second or third viewing will actually, you know, give you that information. You'll be able to kind of process that. Again, you know, not trying to treat death too seriously here and have a bit of fun with it.
What's happening with him?
Always thought it was interesting that he looks like he's playing an imaginary keyboard on the dashboard. Yeah, there's a few little lines through here that just ended up getting cut because it just made it too corny, which is my bad sense of humour in writing. You know, and then these kind of scenes where we were under the pump to shoot them, and you know, you end up just shooting the whole thing in one shot. Just how can we move from character to character to shoot this all in one shot? And that's a nice little scene where it's just shot in one shot because we just had to. Just time did not permit us to take any longer. Now we're kind of coming up to, from a visual effects point of view, what I think is the best part of the movie. I think musically and visually it's all very interesting, and this shot in and of itself was quite a feat, coming in around the table and having Jess in the background there was quite difficult. And we find ourselves at the Light of Arcanant, which the name, again, it's funny, I sometimes wondered where I came up with some of these names, but the Light of Arcanant, you know, it incorporates the Ark, which I didn't even think of when I originally put it together, but something in the back of my brain must have. I just thought it kind of sounded like a cool name. But yeah, sometimes when you look back you go, oh yeah, okay, I can see how that probably was in the back of my mind and linked to where they are heading.
What does it say?
And you know, these are all clues.
The Emerald.
That's it.
That's close by. We'll meet you there.
Again, we're kind of setting up a bit of a MacGuffin here. They think they're on the right track, and then they're going to find out soon that there's actually more information that they haven't gathered.
Sorry?
You know,
She hit us
that
first.
Elindil made his clues quite complicated, and
Max, can you read it?
it's not so easy to just, you know, just a simple part of the clue is not necessarily enough. Sometimes you have to find a second part or find another way of reading it. Sometimes things have two meanings. So
And she hit us, then kicked me.
You two should listen to yourselves.
Hey,
I almost cut this little moment from the movie, and I would have probably, if I could have joined up the sections without it feeling weird. It just never sat with me right.
Please, we've got it now. Let's just
You know, it just feels like it's from a different movie, and I just never. It didn't help that we were you know, didn't have everyone in the room at the same time. Maybe if we'd been able to workshop it a bit with all the actors there at the one time, it would have been better. But yeah, it never quite gelled with me.
So this is the light of Arcanet.
But then we get back into it feeling better. You know, I think this is all really good, and
Mouth of a river.
Cassie does a great job of really making all of this whole location come to life.
Sure it does. At least
As does Andrew. Andrew really kind of makes the end of this scene in so many ways, with his disbelief of what's actually happening. You know, he very much doesn't believe in anything supernatural, and suddenly he's thrust into a world where maybe there is something more to it. And Dave Seraphin here, this little moment, I love it, really sells what's going on. I mean, you got to remember, these guys are in a room, just a blue screen room, and you know, none of this is there, absolutely none of it. You know, we're able to play a little bit with the lighting, but there is nothing to give them the sense that any of this is happening. This is all done later, and you know, it's all computerized done later. Well, the only prop they've got to play with is that cloth.
there's a great power at work here.
That's a great line from Andrew.
Return with the key from the rock hollow. South of the mouth of the river Enron.
Really love the music we found for this moment too. It just, you know, really sells
Something here?
the. It makes it quite elegant. It makes it quite powerful too. What's going on? It sells a lot of, you know, helps the sound effects too.
Eat and drink, and I will protect the one you love until you return.
Max?
I think a lot of times when people watch it for the first time, they would have been surprised by their own voices, because often revoiced with different people. Just went, you know, oh, can you do that line? Can you do that line? And it's actually the character that plays Task ends up doing that angel voice, which is quite funny. That line there, looking in the wrong place, is a bit of a homage to Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they use that exact same line. We did that a little bit. It actually ended up cutting out a moment when Abigail says, "I've got a bad feeling about this," before Jack smashes the car into the hoods. She says Jack, and I cut out the bit where she said, "I've got a bad feeling about this." I just felt it was a bit too corny in that moment. And again, playing now, I'm starting to play with people's emotions a bit, because they're saying that she's getting excited by the new guy Jack, and poor Max is getting left behind.
Could be anywhere. Has to be another clue somewhere.
And we travelled a lot of different locations to shoot all this, and you know, even though we ended up with a lot of blue screen material like this scene, you know, you try and shoot as much of it for real as you can, and in real locations. It just helps give everything life, you know. And you end up in a computer generated world, you do end up with shots that you just never quite feel right. You know, these tighter shots with Tasker I would like to redo, and even some of those other, the one with the phone.
Something must have happened. Check it out.
You know, and look, the movie took so long to make that we ended up with, you know, very outdated phones. I don't think the cars feel outdated, but phones certainly do. Phones are things that, you know, get updated so often and so quickly that and people tend to update to the newer phone. So it's that kind of technology. It's always dangerous. I didn't really try and shoot any close-ups of it, just only where I had to, knowing that would ultimately causes it dates the movie very quickly, whereas cars don't tend to date it as quickly. This shot here was a pickup that we did about a year after the initial scene was shot, and there's that one shot of him waiting, and I wanted to just give him a bit of a spiritual side at this point in time. We haven't seen him do anything, but by the end of the movie we very much get, you know, who he is and where he's come from in terms of being involved in the clan. At this stage, you know, we're not wanting to give too much of that away, but just start to hint towards it. And I felt that was important enough to go back to the location and reshoot that pickup shot just to add in that moment of him. I also thought it was just, he found it too quickly. You know, it was just too easy for him to find it, and there needed to be a reason why he found it. And it needed to, you know, come from within him, like he felt where it was, or he just knew inside of him.
Let's get back.
What are you freaks are they?
This scene was fun to shoot. Evidently Dave and I were yelling our heads off as we were doing this, so we had fun. Didn't get to shoot it as wide as I would have liked. So much blue screen, you do become very limited as to the angles you can choose, and you know, it feels a bit one-dimensional, a bit two-dimensional, just because you just don't have the options to move the camera in the same way as when you're dealing with a real set. Again, a bit of this is probably delving into black comedy. They're kissing, he's running around with a knife in his back. Not necessarily a massive fan of black comedy, but I thought that was kind of funny. The funny juxtaposition anyway. The two baddies can have a passionate moment while he's dying in the background. Probably says more about who they are more than anything else.
Oh, Blake.
I didn't necessarily want to play around with the idea of him trying to have a cigarette while he's dying, but
I told you I saw something.
I think we kind of got away with it just.
We should get out of here.
Now again, I think it's funny that she can't get it lit, and by the time she gets the lighter lit, he's dead. Maybe I do like black comedy more than I realise. Again, the difficulty with a moment like this is how do you now remove yourself? You've just killed one of the main characters. And one of the reasons for doing that is to slowly set up the audience to say anything could happen. Anyone could die at any moment. So don't get too comfortable with seeing these characters around, which can also be a bad thing because then you don't start rooting for anyone because you go, oh, they'll just die anyway. So it's a fine line with a lot of these things. You know, you've just killed someone, but now you're suddenly moving on with story. And Jack has made that happen. But a better way to get out of here is to eventually have, you know, Handress turn up and get everyone out, and then we don't need to worry about the fact that we've got a very important character that's laying dead on the ground.
And there's another legend.
What is it?
A creature carries a flaming sword.
All these clues were quite difficult to write.
Protecting it.
I had to kind of do a bit of research and thinking into what different things were, but you also, you don't want every clue to be the same. You don't want it to sound the same, have the same flavour, so you've got to kind of think of different ways to say things and different ways of getting them across, and then have even different characters be the ones that know, that have got the inside information to pass along to the other characters, you know, what the clue or the riddle means. You spend quite a lot of time just trying to figure out clues. And then even, you know, to remember little moments like when they first put their hand away from that had glowed really brightly. So for him to hope that would happen again and be a distraction enough to, you know, just buy them enough time to get out of the cave.
Keep going.
Yeah, it was kind of in the moment that I thought maybe she should just kind of give her ankle a bit of a tweak.
I'll hold him up.
You know, she doesn't do anything serious here, but it's enough to just slow her down in the moment, and for him to have to, you know, face Handress, who was coming after them. I don't know if it feels cheap or contrived. I thought it was a nice little moment to have something like that happen. Often when heroes are running, they don't just tweak an ankle, and yeah, I thought that was kind of a nice difference. You start to see how bad kind of Handless is, how much he doesn't care. You also see how good a fighter Jack is, and how strong he is, and how he's not scared of anyone. You know, if there was someone to be feared, Handless is the person to be feared, and Jack is not afraid of him. Although he does just punch his hand straight into the rock, missing his head. This is another noisy scene where we made a lot of noise shooting and rehearsing it.
He's not dead.
I don't like to linger on
What about Max?
effect shots if I don't have to. I think if you linger on them, sometimes you kind of point out that it's an effect shot, and I like to just cut them up like they're just something you shot normally, and that way it just feels like it's an organic part of the thing, and you're not highlighting, hey, this is an effect shot, and we paid so much money for it, or in our case spent so much time making it. I wanted the shot to stand alone for itself. Then we get into a section where, again, I wanted the movie's locations to give it a sense of grandeur, a sense of bigness. And you can only do that by travelling to places like Mount Hotham and shooting locations like this. And, you know, when you write the story, you want to send your characters here so that they will encounter whatever they encounter in these locations, but also so that the movie feels big and large and like it's travelled over a certain destination. You know, even via the use of CG shots, you want to make the movie travel forward. And this scene is a combination of something we shot like on our second shoot day and also as a pickup. It never quite gelled in my feeling, but you know, we needed Max to be there, and for whatever reason he had information to impart to Jack and Abigail, and yeah, not a strong scene, but it worked to move the characters forward. Now, this is one of my favourite scenes. The characters currently are working in what would be 0 Celsius, basically the freezing point of water for those who are working in Fahrenheit. Very cold conditions, and yet the performances really don't. They don't give away that they're cold. A little bit of Andrew there shaking is because he's cold, but all three of the performances are really good considering how cold they were. And you know, this was a nice little moment. I loved the fact, and I wanted to bring a sympathy for Max at this point, so that when he says "you are beautiful," all the girls kind of go, "Oh, he's so sweet," and yet he's about to die, and how, you know, she's been nothing worthy of him. And yet probably at the start of the movie, most of the girls probably thought, oh, you know, she's more than worthy of him. It's just a little change. And yet now he's died. And she's given him the kiss of death. And now it's too late for her to pursue anything there. Not that it was ever her intention, but it just brings a sadness, because that door is closed, even though it probably was never a door she wanted to open. And now she has to be protected by someone that, yes, she is probably more in love with, but she doesn't trust in the same way that she would trust Max. I think that highlights the world we live in so many ways. The girls that want the guys are often, it's a case of, they're not necessarily the guys you would trust, but yet that's the guys they want. And this is when Jack has the opportunity to be a bit of a superhero. And musically, I really wanted this moment. If I could have put Superman music in this moment, I would have. And not for any other reason than to betray the audience. You know, this music really leads him to say he is going to save the day. And yet that will ultimately betray the audience in a moment's time when he realises he comes to face with something that he can't beat and something that at the moment he cannot face. The Hoods, yeah, he can beat all them. And he can even beat Tasker. She's a sneaky, conniving one. But he also knows where she is. Well, Handress will be. And if Handress has that knife, well, he has to give up. There's a point at which he can fight. There's also a point at which he has to give up. And he's not in any position to fight at the moment. And ultimately, even his thoughts are not for Abigail, even though her thoughts are for him. You know, he's a selfish character. And she isn't. And that probably makes her the ultimate character in the movie. The problem is she doesn't know what to do now, and she questions, do I go backwards, do I go forwards? And she says, well, look, I'll go forwards, even though I don't know where it leads. And it's probably not a brave endeavour, because at the moment she doesn't know what she's up against. But she decides to move forward regardless. And ultimately she finds herself in a place where she's confused, but she also is smart enough to kind of put two and two together. And you know, the plain of Bethlehem means bread, or the house of bread. So she ends up on the plain of Bethlehem, and she's able to very quickly work out that the plain of Bethlehem, the house of bread, well, this is the plain. This is the plain of the house of bread, and that this would relate somehow to the clue she's already heard, and that Elindil's secret will be below this. That's not a massive reach for the audience, I don't think.
Below the plain of Bethlehem. It's just down there.
And ultimately, Abigail is reaching our final destination, the climax. And she's reaching it on her own. And she has no idea where she is. And I kind of like that. I like that you get to the end of the story and you still really don't have any idea. Now, where are we?
You were supposed to kill him.
And the bad guy's going to give it away.
I asked you to take care of it. Let's not speak ill of the dead.
You know, he's giving away some clues here about who is Handress, who is Jack, who is Ray. You know, all these little clues are all there within the story, and I've made sure that they always maintain their way through the final edit.
Are you alright?
I'm okay.
I'm surprised to see you here.
And I'm surprised you made it at all. I suppose I have Jack to thank for that. An ever-increasing thorn in my side. I should have kicked you out of the Brotherhood.
It's part of this story that Abigail was always meant to make it because she's going to become the sacrifice.
Did you forget to mention this, did you?
And here's the reveal where, for Abigail, she finds out for sure that Jack is part of the clan. She may not have been sure of it in the past, but now she has to understand that. And now she's also understanding that Ray's part of the process.
Because he killed the chosen one.
Ray's your father.
In fact, she understands who Ray is.
You've met him? He's still alive?
No, he can't have survived. Yes,
You said they killed him!
they tried to kill him. But surely it makes you happy to know he's still alive. How could you kill your own brother?
And now we find out that Ray and Alan are
They
brothers.
kill each other.
Elindil's secrets.
So if we ever thought that Ray and Alan looked a little bit alike, well, we understand. Okay, well, they're very much alike. They're brothers.
In this ship.
At this stage, we still don't know that they're twins.
Noah's Ark.
Ironically,
which is why they're
it's the
so
one
much
thing that
alike.
can prove that the history that Elindil wrote is
And now we find out we're in Noah's Ark.
ship is destroyed.
And ultimately Noah's Ark will be the undoing of Elendil's writings. So he's written a new past, which makes him the Lord and Emperor of the whole
The
world.
seal of this ship
And
outlines
that will
the
only come to
location
fruition
of
if he can find the Tree of Life and bring himself to life and keep bringing himself to life. And people will see, this man is immortal. He must be God.
We will bring Elindil and all
And
the gods back
one of the
and
greatest
demand that people
things that people always say about God is he never shows himself. Well, he would become the ultimate hero and the ultimate figure that could ever call himself God, because he would be able to reincarnate himself over and over and over if he can find the Tree of Life. And that's Elendil's plan, is that when the technology is available in order to not only find the Tree of Life, but to be able to reincarnate the tree, to regrow the tree, then at that point he will also be able to reincarnate himself. That's Elendil's plan. And the scripture that he writes is almost, it's a red herring. He doesn't care about it. It's just there to cause problems. But for someone like Abigail, with the potential of what could be written, and the fact that, maybe in her past she also is a little bit predisposed to not necessarily want to believe the scripture, that is it's quite enticing for her to find that. And yet when she gets to this point, she realises, well, you know what? Okay, the Tree of Life, or even Noah's Ark, ultimately says that the scriptures that exist tell a story which is true, and that Elendil's stories must be fabricated. And hence we end up in this fight, caused by David, who starts to show his true colours, which are, he doesn't like the clan. He wants to fight against them, and almost he is perhaps selfish, and yet he's brought Abigail along on the journey, and he's true to her ultimately. Now the fights between Handris and him are important, because that's the knife that can kill him, and Handris is seen as the most powerful hood, so for those two characters to be against each other, and then for a bit of humour to be injected, we've lost Blake, we've lost Max, and so Marcus now kind of takes over the comic character. Little moments like this, which were always fun to shoot, and then even when he comes and meets up against Tasker here, I always wanted this to be humorous. These are the humorous moments, but of course, let's remind ourselves that ultimately this is a serious story, and the Hoods are bad dudes. Yeah, this part of the story was not written in stone in terms of this character does this character does that. I basically said this is the final outcome, and these are the basic movements of the characters, and one of the producers, Mark Snell, kind of went through and made a little animation which lasted all of 24 frames. I think it was supposed to last 24 seconds, but it lasted for 1 second, which was quite humorous to watch all of the movements happen all in that moment. But look, the idea was that all these little elements had to happen, and ultimately it was our lead male here, Dave Donchi, that came through with creating lots of these little scenarios. And I actually tightened the edit up. I think you can, when you watch it, you can actually tell that it's been tightened up severely in some cases. The fight was a lot longer than this, and the edit had to be shortened. And ultimately, it really needed to be quite quick. Little moments like this that would, with a Hood from nowhere comes to intervene, that is shortened almost to what is necessary to make it flow from one moment to the next. We don't even really understand how Handris here has lost his jacket or his cloak. That just disappears, but when we shot it, there was meaning and intention to all of that. But there just wasn't time really, and it was becoming laboured, and it was becoming a bit violent for the sake of being violent. And that was never... The movie was never meant to be violent for the sake of being violent. It was meant to be violent in order to show off how bad certain people are. Even here, ultimately, Jack is willing to do anything to get what he wants. And he will persist and persist. And then a little moment like that, do Hanvis and Tasker survive because they are no longer stuck with a knife? There's little moments like that, but it's just meant to linger perhaps in the audience's memory and make them wonder. Much of the story is meant to make the audience wonder and question and go, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Is this the reason for that? Is that the reason for that? And so there would be a discussion, not necessarily an answer. And ultimately, at this point, the audience is supposed to think that both Alan and David have died. Alan's been stabbed by the knife. We don't in any way think that there's a reason why David couldn't die. Well, that's the hope anyway. And certainly Abigail will reinforce that. Because her hope would be that David's alive, but she says everyone's gone. And the hope is that in the audience mind, they think, well, everyone that's important to her is gone. At least Marcus is there. And this conversation in the car was much longer as well. Marcus had a lot more to say to her, but ultimately in the edit you kind of think, maybe there really just needs to be some very little moments. And her care for him and his care for her can come out in smaller ways. If you let it be longer, it sounds a bit preachy. It sounds like he's trying to tell her something. Whereas this, the way it is, it sits much better. There's less preachiness. There's more questions. And yet, I think the audience wants that. The audience doesn't want necessarily answers at this point. They want questions for these things. And ultimately, to know that she has to face Ray and say that Jack is dead. And that leads the audience to knowing exactly what the next scene's going to be. So when we get there, there's no surprise. And the only surprise might be that there is a car in the foreground to the left, which is Jack's car. And again, very intentional. Not there for people that watch it the first time, there for people that watch it second and third time, so that they'll go, the car was there all along. I should have known that he was going to be there. Again, this is shot very much like the first time they arrived at the house. All the same shots. And he arrives in the same way. He doesn't say the same lines. He's much more caring this time.
Yes.
But
Please come in.
again, the audience is set up to think he is going to be a certain way. Now we're shot in daylight rather than complete night time. Even though when we last arrived it wasn't necessarily night time, the candles were lit almost for their sake rather than his sake.
How did your search go?
We found Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
Cassie did an amazing job here. She really had to carry the emotion of the audience and bring us forward to the point where
Bearer of bad news.
something has happened that's sad.
Jack was killed when the Ark was
And yet
destroyed.
Ray is not journeying with her in the same way that she almost feels like he should be.
I'm sorry.
So she's got to kind of carry his burden as well. She's got to carry the sadness for him because he's not reacting.
It sounds like your quest has brought you a great deal of pain and sadness.
He saved my life.
And we squirted. She was probably supposed to cry a little more than she did. And she was dehydrated. It had been a long day, and
Well,
we squirted stuff in her eyes. It didn't quite work the same. But the performance is still magnificent. And even though she couldn't kind of bring tears on it, maybe tears would have been too much in this moment.
remember I told you
Just the wet eyes and the little looks are enough. I mean, you'll also notice that
be killed?
Ray here is never ever shot in extreme close-up, whereas Cassie is. And
Stabbed him.
even though I'm cutting between the two of them, I never cut him in extreme close-up. Only she is worthy of the extreme close-up here. And
Alan.
again, it's just to put the emotion on her, not to put it on him.
Jack's uncle.
And this is kind of a classic moment that was always reminiscent of the second Pirates of the Caribbean. I kind of wanted to feel that way,
You throw away your knife.
where we were travelling back and remembering certain things, and suddenly kind of going, oh, okay, that's why, oh, okay, he didn't die then, you know, he won't die again, and oh, okay, this is Ray, and he won't die, and that's why his eyes are the way they are, because he got stabbed at the start of the movie. And the hope was always that the audience wouldn't connect those two things before this moment, and that this little moment would be a little victory dance for the two characters as they put that on Abigail. Hope you've enjoyed hearing some insights into the story. I'm sure there's more that you'll want to know. There's more questions that will come from it, but maybe you'll pick some of that up in the special effects commentary